Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Plan Tracker Facebook Live. I'm your host, Sarah, Community Engagement Manager at Plan Tracker. And today, I'm joined by Megan, who is an early childhood therapist at Engaging Interactions. Megan, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. And how are you today?
I'm great, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, thanks. That's good. That's good. Now, Megan, we've actually lived in the same neighbourhood for quite a few years now, and I know that our local community knows you quite well. But for those who are joining us live tonight that haven't in fact met you yet, would you be able to just talk a little bit about what you do in the NDIS space?
Absolutely. Well, I work with children 0 to 10 years of age and even some a little bit older. I am a DIR floor time trained practitioner or therapist.
Mhm.
I'm also a teacher trained Bachelor of Education teacher and early childhood educator. I worked in early intervention for around 10 years, probably 10 years or more, and worked in schools before that and early childhood settings before that. So my work is predominantly, I'm also known as a key worker. My role is also a key
Yeah.
worker where I support families and support children in their natural environments. So I don't have a clinic.
Mm.
I'm out and about. You might see my van. If you live on the Central
Yeah.
Coast, you'll see my van
Yeah.
moving around the Central
Yeah.
Coast. So I visit schools and childcare centres and homes
Mm.
and support children and families under the NDIS with their goals.
Mm.
Yeah.
I've always considered you as a bit of a sort of a therapist, but also this person that journeys along with children throughout their life, because you do meet them wherever they're at. And I know that we first met, I think, at a community playgroup or something like that many years ago
We
over in
did.
Baddo Bay. Yeah.
Yes,
And
yes.
then I've seen you, of course, at childcare centres and now supporting my children over the years in our home and community. So I can certainly speak from personal experience and many of the families that we support at Plan Tracker that you're a really valuable
Oh,
part of their team. So I'm so glad that you've been able to find the time to join us tonight for this chat, Megan. Let's jump into the subject at hand, which is the dreaded teletherapy. And I say dreaded because I think whilst we understand that, technology and the current COVID situation has brought many conveniences into our life, and we can sort of work out more digital ways to get life done and to connect with one another. But there is that sense of fatigue, isn't there? And especially for you and I in this area where we're facing or we're going through a current lockdown, there is that sense of fatigue as, oh, we're here again. We're here again. And it's like, will we be doing face-to-face or teletherapy? It's like that switch between the two. So I wanted to ask you first to reflect back at the very first time that we went into lockdown, which is the beginning of 2020. Megan, I just wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about your experience of that as a therapist and supporter of many families.
Well, I think probably like everyone else, there was a little bit of that fear of, oh my goodness, how am I going to shift what I do? And as you said, there is that thing of when you're with someone and you're connecting with people, it is that feeling of connection. And often,
Okay.
how do we get connection? Sometimes it's we consider that being in the same room as somebody, or face to face with somebody, or being in that same space, where I've heard other people talk about it like energy. And so often that happens when you're in a room with someone and you're sitting next to them or you're face to face with them. So it's particularly with what I do, because I'm very much focused on engaging with the child, engaging with the parent. And how can you do that across a screen? Because it can be so impersonal at times. And so I think for me, it was very much shifting into that mode of, okay, how can we continue still connecting with people and engaging with people? We're going to have to shift to doing things through Zoom. I mean, I think like most people use Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully for me, I was quite familiar with Zoom because I do run training and things like that over Zoom. So I was reasonably
Okay.
familiar with Zoom. However, I certainly appreciated that for a lot of families, they weren't. Like, Zoom is not something that they would, know of maybe until 2020
Yep.
and homeschooling and everything else and therapies online. So, I think that was a big shift for me, knowing how we could connect with people and connect with children. But for me, it was also, I like to shift with things and change with things. I like that way of looking at things and kind of going, how can I make something a little bit better out of this situation? I enjoyed looking at really interesting ways that I could engage with children and families. And for me, it was very much about having that flexibility. And thankfully, I think because I worked from home and my kids were at home and husband was at home, so I did have that flexibility where I could kind of go, hey, do you know what? If I want to chat to a family and a family wants to chat to me at 7 o'clock at night, I could do that. I appreciate maybe not everyone can, but I could be very flexible with that, which was really helpful. But I think one of the biggest ones for me was it really did shift how I was able to coach families and parents in particular. So I think for children who we know that it might be a little bit tricky for them to sit down in front of a screen, and parents would, you know, there is, as you said, there's a lot of fatigue behind that for us as people on a screen, but also I think as parents, you know, and a bit of that stress. I don't think my child's going to sit in front of this screen and engage with somebody. So for me, it was kind of shifting that idea and that of how I delivered a service as well. So it was coaching parents. So often it might mean you changing the laptop or changing the phone to see a parent and a child interacting. And rather than me being the one there, kind of, you know, spurring that on, I'm there coaching that family like, oh, hey, gee, look at what they just did then. How wonderful. I wonder if you put this block on here or you accidentally knock it down. Let's see what will happen then. So I think for me, they were just a few of the shifts that happened. And I think, you know, from comments from parents, you know, they did enjoy some of those, but then there were some times when they kind of said, I'm just not up to it today. And I think that was something, you know, for me, it was very much about, hey, we've got to, I had to respect that. And that was just how it was. Yeah.
So that flexibility, I guess, and the openness that you had to try different things and to shift your thinking, like you said, was obviously a big part of that first lockdown experience for you, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think flexibility, because, you know, being DR floor time trained, as I said, it can be a little bit follow that child's lead when you're sitting with them at home or in a childcare centre. It's very easy to do if they move off to go and jump on the little trampoline or something, you could join with them. But when you're in a teletherapy and the child walks away from the screen, it's a little bit more difficult to follow their lead. So I also had to then shift my own thinking as well to kind of go, well, how can I do maybe some more interactive activities on the screen and work with that, but still follow the child's lead. So
and I think even your background, Megan, that you're presenting with today is just a little indication that you've obviously thought about things that can capture perhaps a child's interest and their curiosity. And I know I've seen quite a few different backgrounds over my time of you zooming into our house. And obviously that's part of your thinking about captivating the child's interest and showing some sort of level of, I guess, thinking outside the box, isn't it? About not replicating exactly the same therapy session that you would have if you were physically in the home there.
Oh, definitely. And I think it's very much about how can we still maintain that connection and engagement of a child, you know, a recognition. Doesn't have to be eye contact and all that, but, oh, someone's on the screen, something's different there. And then not necessarily having an activity on screen, but yeah, as you say, a bit of a background. And I could, you know, even be a little bit cheeky and kind of, you know, change it. And I could then be in, you know, Finding Nemo and, you know, have those beautiful moments where I can, you know, do those types of things, or then change it for the people where it's a little bit too visually overwhelming, where we can have games, you know, of I Spy and things like that. So yeah, definitely. I think that's part of it, really kind of thinking outside of the box a little bit, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess you've sort of kind of already answered a lot of this, but is there anything else that you want to add now that you've had that first experience and we're sort of back in a situation now where we're having restrictions and we're currently in this neighbourhood in a lockdown? How are you approaching it? Is there anything different? Have you learnt anything that has shown you a slightly different way in the coming weeks?
I think I probably find this one a little bit more trickier
Okay.
because I think, it's so, we're still so unaware of how long we're actually going to be in this situation. Whereas,
Yeah.
I thought I'd be back at work this week, but
Yeah.
seeing clients face to face, and that hasn't happened. So
Mm.
whilst it was a faster shift to be able to jump back into teletherapy, and being able to have those conversations with parents and kind of say, hey, we're back here. How are you with this again? But then also I've had, some beautiful new families come on where
Mhm.
it's that road again to kind of go, have we tried that teletherapy? What if we give it a go and let's see what happens? And so I think a lot of that can be, and that's an individual. These are all individual differences.
Mhm.
Every family, every child's very different, and every day, every session that we have teletherapy is very different. So I
Isn't
think
that
that
the
is
truth? Isn't that the truth? Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, I
Yeah.
could have, a bit of an idea in my mind that we might do this, and it will go fantastically one day, and then the next day you're seeing a little kiddo at a different time of the day, or whatever it might be, or they've got the fatigue of maybe already having a Zoom session with somebody, and they're just not into it that day. So it
Mm,
does have to
mm.
be very quickly shifting.
Okay.
Yeah, so I
Okay.
think for me that, but it is a little bit of how do we move forward with this, um, you know, and with an
With
unknowing thing.
not
Yeah,
knowing yet. Yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So now if we turn our focus directly to those families who are joining us live tonight, and I will just check our comment section as well, Megan, just to see whether there's any questions that are coming through for the community. I encourage you to leave them live in the chat box, or you can also post questions later on. We'll monitor that, and I'll share the contact details for Megan at the end of this session if you're interested in connecting with her directly. But I guess I wanted to touch on the point of, so for families now who are thinking about, okay, this, maybe I need to try this. First time I sort of waited it out, but now we're back here again. I really do need to try this. Or I tried it, didn't go so well. I took a big break. Maybe it's time to retry it. So for those parents, families, carers, whoever they are, what are some of your top tips for success in attempting any type of teletherapy?
Oh, yeah. I think practice is probably the biggest thing.
Okay.
For ourselves, we often don't like a lot of change, so that has a bit plays a big part of it as well. But particularly for our children, we're working often with children where we do need to work on certain skills over and over again, so that we can build those beautiful neuro pathways and things like that. So sometimes practicing and giving things a go a number of times is really helpful,
Okay.
because it sets up those beautiful experiences and allows those experiences to happen. I think if you can, and I'm hoping most people have these beautiful open relationships with their therapist, so they can have conversations with them. Like mornings might be a great time for me. I find little Johnny in the afternoon,
Mm-hmm.
it's just too tricky. Can we
Mm-hmm.
do a morning? Because we're
Mm-hmm.
most likely to get some great, a longer session then possibly.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not seeing if sessions get cut short, or they need to be 30 minutes rather than an hour, or whatever it might be. That it's more about what's happening within that time rather than the length of time. Maybe I think it's about that process, and it's about keeping that engagement going
Mm-hmm.
with their therapist, or that child keeping that relationship if we're in lockdown for a
Yeah.
while. So I think that's a big thing that that might be one big point as well. That keep trying, and have those conversations with your therapist and self-reflect together. I think that is a big point.
Mm.
Think about ways that you can make Zoom a little bit more movable for you, whether you use an
Yes,
iPad if that's
absolutely.
available.
I've done that myself, Megan. I
Yeah.
remember that sometimes when I used to set it up for Spencer in the room, the laptop sort of at a place which would give the broadest view of the room. And I had some things out for Spencer. And it was almost like you were just sort of sitting off to the side there. and he sort of came and went as he needed
Absolutely.
to join the activity or to join the space with you and I when he was able to. But then there were other times where I remember texting you saying, okay, I've got a plate of snacks, I've got this, and we timed it in the day that it would suit Spencer. And so then we were able to do that. And I remember one time I had you on my phone, and I think we were going out the backyard, going out
Absolutely.
the backyard to the bubbles and to those types of things. So
Yeah.
definitely being mobile. I mean, it really depends on the individual child. Of course it does, but I do know that it never sort of really looked the same. And I'm so glad that we were able to have that conversation so that I didn't feel like it was my responsibility as a parent. And I guess that's my message to other parents who are watching tonight too, that it's not your responsibility to keep your child in front
Oh,
of a Zoom screen,
absolutely.
for a
Absolutely.
session. It's
Yes.
more an experiment,
Yeah.
about, as you said, those moments of engagement through, not the length of time.
Exactly. And if it shifts, so, it's mum and the child in those moments, or dad and the child, or care and the child in those moments, and the
Mm-hmm.
therapist is the one there, yeah, in the background. I've had many sessions where we've started off with the child in the backyard jumping on his mini tramp and then going to
Right.
the swing. And then
Mm-hmm.
that's allowed that child, because we've considered his individual differences of needing to move, needing to be in his space at the moment. And then we were able to come back to something a little bit more face to face on the screen. But I
Right.
think it is appreciating that it doesn't have to be, and I love that point you make, Sarah, that it doesn't have to be that face to face. We're here interacting, we're getting eye contact, because that can be fatiguing.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, it
that
can.
child just engaging, playing on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you
Mm-hmm.
have that ability to use an iPad or use a phone, like Zoom's available on phones, which is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Shift a laptop around,
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. I think that's really certainly helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think, yeah, being aware that sometimes through teletherapy, is it about keeping that relationship alive, particularly in 2020, because we were off for such a long time.
Mm-hmm.
It might have just been keeping that relationship between the child and the family and the therapist alive,
Okay.
seeing each
Yeah.
other.
So
So I
you're
think
saying
that's
it's not necessarily about the ongoing therapy goals per se, but the first part is just that relational safety, that keeping that positive, relationship
Yes, I
between,
think so. I mean, we've always got
okay.
those goals in mind, of course. However,
Mm,
those goals are a little bit harder to get to when that relationship starts to sort of fall apart. We have
yeah.
to get back to building that up again.
Mm,
So
mm,
definitely I agree. I think keeping that engagement, that relationship with somebody, and they're in the room, they're aware of what they're
mm-hmm,
doing. They commenting on little Johnny building a tower, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that the therapist the one driving it. Little Johnny is.
mm,
And so I think it's, but it does take a lot of shifting for parents, therapists, for all of us to think about that in a different way,
yeah.
and how comfortable are a lot of people to do that. And so there's a lot of things to consider there, but yeah, hopefully they're
Mm,
discussions and self-reflections that you can have. I think also becoming, another tip might be becoming familiar with those platforms if you can as a parent.
okay.
How comfortable are you with Zoom? Getting on Zoom,
Mm,
navigating it if you have to.
mm,
There's different ways that if you've got a child who likes to draw, they can share their screen. Hopefully therapists, know Zoom quite well, so they can talk you through it. But knowing how, you could put the
mm,
whiteboard on so your child can draw on a screen and you're
mm,
engaging that way, all those types of things.
mm.
Or a child, if it's an older child, they have a bit of autonomy to be able to share their screen and say, hey, I was looking at this,
Yeah.
this room.
That sounds
um,
familiar. That sounds familiar. Just thinking about individual differences, Megan. I I just reflect on my oldest son, who the audio coming directly from the laptop is really quite difficult for him. And you've noticed without the headphones, he'll disengage or he'll leave teletherapy quite quickly.
mhm.
But he really needs to have his audio set up just the way that he can process it. And then, of course, his first video, boom, he's like, Megan, I want to show you YouTube or BTN or whatever else
Yes.
he's found. Um, and I think I guess that's part of the DIR framework, isn't it? By allowing the children to,
Very,
set up their own safety. Yeah.
it very much is. And I think when we do that, then we're opening that child up to having that control over their own environment as such.
Okay.
And then it does allow us to kind of go, okay, well, how do I shift what I do to be able to meet them? And that is a process. It's nothing that happens overnight. But I think, it's being very much aware, as you said, particularly for Zeke, and for a lot of children, it's kind of knowing their individual differences, or by that I mean, say, a sensory profile. OTs would be great in knowing that. Speech therapists have fantastic knowledge on that. Most therapists do, I think, these days have a great idea of what that means to have for sensory profile. But like I've got this great, I'm pointing to my background, of course it's not there, it's a green screen, but a lot of children might find that really dysregulating to look at that, so it might very quickly have to be shifted back to something else. Or you might need to have it there for somebody else where they just kind of love it, and then you're quickly finding cats or something, whatever their interest is, so you can get it up on there. But as you say, looking at those types of things over the screen. Have you got a child that loves to move? Then sitting at a screen for 30 minutes, 60 minutes is probably not going to be great. So how can we do that in a way where we're supporting that? And I think just talking about whoever you're doing teletherapy with about your child's interests, because that's often the way in, especially through teletherapy, when we don't have that connection or that that energy that we can have with somebody while they're in a room, or activities out that you can see a child move to. So sometimes, we do need to be aware of what that child's interests are. You find stories to read, or whatever that could be for. So there's
I noticed that quite a few times I've seen you share your screen across. So there's the whiteboard, just to go back, there's a whiteboard function which is within Zoom platform already, and then you can use that. You can control that your side, and also the child or the family can control that to use that. And then the share screen option is obviously just sharing, but I've noticed you've found a lot of like free links or platforms such as and they have interactive puzzles and things like that. Is that just take a bit of research for therapists or families to find those things, such as the spot puzzle the other day? Was that a free resource, Megan, or how do you find those things?
A lot of it sometimes is just free resources.
Okay.
That spot one we did the other day was just an online one. Of course, you were looking at it to make sure it's appropriate before we pop it up there, and nothing's going to pop up and scare us as we're doing a Zoom session. But definitely knowing those. Talk to some teachers. If you've got teacher friends out there, often they have some fantastic things. Go Noodle's another one. I've seen lots of fantastic therapists use Go Noodle for movement. And they put the laptop there and kids do some dancing. So, and it's great for calming down. So Go Noodle, that's another free resource. Epic is another great one, a good reading one. And I think they use it in schools, but I know but parents can get it as well.
I might pop the links in the comment below so that folks can have a look at those ones.
Sure. Or if you're on your iPad, then I haven't used it, but Play School have a fantastic app, and a lot of those are really interactive. So you could be if you're on an iPad, then you could be using it and the child's talking to you about what they want. Or if you've got mum or dad there and the child's nonverbal, so they're using gestures, then mum and dad can say, oh, he's pointing to the chicken, or he's pointing to this. Oh, you want the chicken in there? Fantastic. The chicken goes in the farm, or whatever that could be. And so, there's quite a few, it does shift the way of, of course you want to get away from iPads sometimes, but for teletherapy, sometimes they're great tools to be able to have a bit of that engagement with. But definitely, there's some online puzzles that you can do for children, and you can, and a lot of them, if you look carefully, they're free, and you can just pop them up there, and you can allocate how many pieces you have, and you can take turns in doing it. And just, like I said, if you're aware of Zoom and things like that, then how you could share annotations and stuff like that so someone else can draw on your screen. It just
Mhm.
does take a little bit of getting used to and becoming familiar with Zoom and things like that.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I guess that, doing a little bit of research, becoming familiar with what options are available. And then it sort of sounds like you said in the beginning, be flexible and jump in and try it out and just see
Yeah. And
what
I
kind
think
of
have
thing.
fun. Yeah, have fun, definitely.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Especially in this time when we say we don't know how long we're going to be living in this type of reality, then those moments of connection and engagement, and that shared enjoyment, isn't it? It's so important to all of
Yeah,
us. Yeah.
absolutely. Definitely.
Yeah. Well, that's really great. I think you've given us so many tips, not only for families, but also providers who are watching, and also might be thinking about how they can connect and service and support their community more thoroughly during the times when we see
Mm.
restrictions, and interruptions to face-to-face service. So thank you so much, Megan, for
Oh.
your time, in sharing your thoughts. Is there anything else, just before we wrap up, is there anything else that you think is really important that you'd like to comment on before we finish up?
No, I think that's it. But I think it is just allowing yourself to, have those moments where it may not go smoothly and kind of
Yes.
going, okay, yep, I know that didn't go so smoothly. And for everyone involved, parents, therapists, whoever's
Mm,
doing it, self-reflection's a huge one. I'm a big one for that. I kind of go, gee, that didn't go so well today. And I
yeah.
kind of think about it, why that didn't.
Okay.
And then,
Yeah.
might be checking back in with the family as well. How did you think that went? I
Mm.
find sometimes for me, it might be I'm talking too fast and I'm not
Yeah.
allowing the processing time of my computer or the child on the other end.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's, how we do that as well. But
Mm,
yeah, I think, have a bit of fun, find those. And
mm,
I'm seeing some fantastic things by other therapists on the Central Coast everywhere, where they're doing some fantastic teletherapy things. So
mm, mm.
and they're thinking outside the box is a
The
big one that
box.
we've had to
Yeah.
shift.
Yeah. It does bring
Definitely.
us together, doesn't it, in that idea where we're brainstorming, we're sort of feeding off each other's enthusiasm and ideas. And it really brings us together with a common goal, I think, of traveling through this time, uncertain time, and really, as you said, protecting, and nurturing our relationships, which is
Yeah,
really important.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again. For those who perhaps are curious after hearing Megan and her amazing ideas and thought processes around teletherapy, if you're curious and would like to know more about Megan's work, we're going to pop her webpage, in the comments below, which is engaginginteractions.com.au. And in fact, Zoom platforms are not just for those who run therapy sessions. We at Plan Tracker run our Connect sessions via Zoom. That's an option that you have to connect with us as well, face to face. So you can go to our website, plantracker.com.au, and you have the option of obviously directly emailing us, calling out at 1-800 number during office hours, but you can also book a Zoom session and have a face to face connection. We're always here to talk about perhaps flexible options, as we travel through these restrictions. Perhaps you'd like to talk about, different areas of your funding and how you can access online services. So thank you for everyone joining
Fantastic.
us, and we look forward to next time when we see you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.